review the City of Columbus's utilization of federal COVID funds. This includes the CARES Act, ERA resources, that's Emergency Rental Assistance, and the American Rescue Plan dollars. I want to recognize my colleagues that are here tonight. First, our mayor has joined us for this hearing and will be giving remarks very shortly. I want to recognize my Vice Chair of Finance, Councilmember Nick Bankston, my colleague Mitch Brown, my colleague Shayla Favor, and my colleague Emmanuel Remy. And also I want to recognize the members of the mayor's administration for being here, many of whom you'll hear from this evening. We have Callie Harris from the Department of Finance. We have Director Sam Orth from the Department of Technology. We have Director Stevens from the Department of Development. We have Director Kathy Owens from the Department of Finance, as well as members of both technology and finance team as well. I also want to thank the community leaders that have gathered this evening who will be testifying and listening. Now, I think it's really important as we think about these different sources of funds to remember why the Congress came together to send dollars to our communities. We have to think back to really what it felt like in 2020 as the world shut down around us, as we were learning to mask up, and as our world really changed around us, the uncertainty about what would come next. But we came together as a community and made it through. Now we have the opportunity to continue that recovery and end up even stronger than we started. We would not be able to be here to have this conversation to review the resources that we received and how we spent them, and to think about the future and how we continue to recover, had it not been for the advocacy and the votes of our Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, our Senator Sherrod Brown, and the President for moving these sources of funds directly to cities. Through the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, the City of Columbus has been able to provide unprecedented support for small businesses, for nonprofits, for renters, for workers, and more. Tonight we'll hear about some of those investments. And first up will be the Department of Finance, then Development and Technology. We'll provide an overview of the funds and highlight key investments. We will then have representatives from the Mid-Ohio Food Bank, the Wells Foundation, as well as several small businesses that will provide testimony regarding how these funds impacted their work and our community. We will then have time for public input and comment. With that, I'd like to introduce and turn the podium over to our Mayor, Andrew Ginther, for opening remarks. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. Great to be with you all this evening, and I really appreciate the public engagement that we've had around some of the most significant investments we've been able to make into our neighbors and our neighborhoods during unprecedented times. If I am like you, I am out at our neighborhoods frequently talking with folks about where rescue plan dollars have gone, where CARES dollars have gone, where the emergency rental assistance resources have gone. And it's critically important, I think, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this hearing tonight was to remind the public where these resources came from, how we determined what our roadmap and what our criteria would be for making decisions about where we'd invest these resources, and how we've done that, what we've done and how we've impacted folks in the community. So I'm excited to be here tonight to take stock of the federal funding we received throughout the pandemic and spell out precisely where and how those dollars have been spent. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic challenged our city and our society in a multitude of ways, both magnifying and widening existing disparities in housing, education, healthcare, and employment, just to name a few. It also took a sizable toll on our community's mental health, stability, and well-being, particularly among our young people. We owe it to them and their future to make as many restorative investments as we can. I'm pleased to report that despite these unprecedented shocks to our system, the City of Columbus continues to recover at a remarkable pace. We are, in fact, stronger, healthier, and more resilient than we were before the pandemic began. But we didn't get here alone. We had the support of our fellow neighbors and community leaders at every step of the way. This has been, from the very beginning, a collaborative community endeavor. Back in 2020, we called upon public, private, and nonprofit leaders to examine the impacts of the pandemic as well as their underlying causes. That is when we formed the Recovery and Resiliency Advisory Committee. What we saw was after the Great Recession, there was not a full and inclusive, equitable recovery. Some recovered very quickly and did very, very well coming out of the Great Recession. Other disparities laid glaringly bare and grew during that 10-year period of time. So the committee was chaired by Christy Angel, then President CEO of the YWCA Columbus, and co-chaired by myself, Council President Hardin, and Franklin County Commissioner John O'Grady. We worked in tandem with the members of the full committee, which included representatives from the small business, nonprofit, corporate, and human services sector. Our charge was clear: to identify vulnerabilities in our community and to chart a course towards systemic community change, all through an equity lens. We wanted this group to really guide and inform any investments we were going to make with any federal resources. So in November of 2021, we released a report detailing the committee's findings. It was divided into 3 sections: support for addressing short-term critical needs like housing and food security, readiness pertaining to medium-term stabilization needs like digital inclusion, childcare, workforce, and higher education, and recommendations for long-range topics surrounding community and economic development. In total, there were 37 recommendations outlined in the report, and these recommendations will continue to guide our allocations of COVID relief funds. To that end, the City of Columbus has received over $500 million in federal relief funds to date, and we've invested over 2/3 of these funds to mitigate the effects of the pandemic and speed the pace of recovery. These include CARES Act dollars, ARPA funding, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and grants from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. But we've taken additional actions as well. We created an online form for the community to submit funding requests. We launched a separate website that provided a wide range of health-specific data, including vaccine awareness, COVID-19 testing, case tracking reports, and other vital resources. And city departments have issued RFPs via the city's vendor services portal to solicit new ideas for new projects that will benefit the city as a whole. We established overarching programs to organize, streamline our efforts, and track both our outcomes and expenditures. We reviewed the funding proposals that were submitted to the city. In some cases, proposals were funded in full, others were partially funded. These efforts focused on COVID mitigation, housing, small business support, public safety, youth programming, and more. At the end of the day, however, all of these proposals we received served as invaluable resources to help us gauge the needs of the community. To expand upon these efforts, last year we launched Opportunity Rising, the next phase of the administration's equity agenda. By fulfilling specific goals that lead to greater economic stability, improved health and wellness, and safer, more resilient communities, we will tackle our community's most pressing problems, again, through the all-vital and revealing lens of equity. This initiative has and will continue to inform how we invest our remaining federal dollars, along with the recommendations of the Recovery and Resiliency Committee, which I mentioned earlier. During tonight's hearing, departments will provide a detailed overview of the types and levels of federal funding they received. They'll also specify how and where they invested those funds throughout the community thus far. I'd like to thank our residents for the strength, their understanding, their resiliency during these unprecedented and difficult times, extraordinary times. Together, we'll continue to build the foundation for a stronger future and ensure that Columbus remains the very best community in the country. The recommendations and the work of the Recovery and Resiliency Committee we're grateful for. It has helped to guide our choices, investments, and partnerships over the last several years, and look forward to hearing from the departments and the public tonight about how those resources have impacted lives, whether it's housing and food security, folks suffering and struggling with addiction, overdose, homelessness. All of these resources have been focused on meeting our most important and basic needs in the community during this extraordinary time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciated your comments and the work that has focused on equity and the issues that we've seen in how the pandemic touched us all, but impacted us, some of us, differently. And I also appreciate the foundation and the structure that was created when you created the Recovery and Resiliency Task Force. And I would just encourage members of the public to go to the website and kind of pull that down. We'll be talking about and referencing that, I think, a lot this evening and next week when we have our second hearing. And to the mayor's point, and what I would like to work with my colleagues on, is really focusing where we go from here using that framework. So as folks want to help us and advocate as we move forward, going back to that recovery and resiliency document, I think will be critically important for all of us. I think it sets the foundation of where we go from here. Would any of my colleagues like to speak before we hear from the departments? With that, then we'll jump right in. With that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Ms. Callie Harris from the Department of Finance. Callie, the floor is yours.
Mayor Ginther, Council President Harden, and members of council.
Ms. Callie, I think that you're...
I'm sorry? It is.
There we go.
Can we hear now? Okay. We'll start over. Mayor Ginther, Council President Harden, and members of council, I am going to be providing you with an updated overview of the federal COVID relief funding the city has received to date. Since the defined start of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the City of Columbus has received over $509 million in relief funds from a range of federal programs. The larger allocations have been provided under the coronavirus. That's okay. Thank you. Under the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act, or CARES, the American Rescue Plan Act, and the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. In addition, the city has also received Housing and Urban Development, or HUD monies from the following sources: CDBG CV, ESG CV, and Home ARP. This slide depicts the eligible program areas that have currently been identified and designated for obligation of our federal allocations: human services and small business support. The majority of these funds have been utilized to support general operating expenses in small businesses within the community. We also have spent a significant amount of funding on housing assistance, which includes rental and utility assistance, public safety COVID response. Our youth programming and child care initiatives have funded summer enrichment and empowerment programs. There have been expenses related to supplies and services for the public health response on COVID mitigation efforts. And finally, a small portion of funding has been expended on premium, hero pay, and administrative expenses. Here we can see the numbers of these program areas, listing exactly where our dollars have been spent and obligated to date. It is evident the city has prioritized funding up to this point for human services and small business support, and housing, rental, and utility assistance, $84 million to date. This is followed by public safety COVID response and heavy investments in youth programming and COVID mitigation. Finally, this slide details the funds still available from ARPA, ERA, and home ARP allotments. To date, all CARES Act funds have been fully expended. We have obligated and spent over half of the ARPA dollars, and there is still a sizable amount of ERA due to additional reallocations received by the city within the past few months. The direction of the remaining ARPA funds is still to be determined, but the balance will be obligated by the end of 2024. There is $68 million in the ERA balance, which will be encumbered by September 2025. As far as the $16.4 million in home ARP dollars, a plan has been filed with HUD and a request for proposal process will be initiated later this year. These dollars must be spent by 2030. This wraps up the presentation and overview from finance. Is there anything I can assist in clarifying or any questions?
Thank you, Callie, for your presentation. Mayor, do you have any initial thoughts or before we council members jump in?
Callie, you'd made mention of additional resources that have come into from the emergency rental assistance in the last few months. Can you just share with council members and with the public what those changes and what that process will look like moving forward?
Sure. We have received reallocated dollars from both the state, which was a voluntary reallocation. The state had unspent dollars, and we chose to allocate $35 million of those dollars. And we've also requested additional reallocation dollars from the Treasury on our own, which totals $68 million more in ERA funding.
Thank you, Mayor. And just following up on the mayor's question in terms of additional resources that we've come in. When we were originally getting CARES Act and I believe even ARPA, the resources didn't all just drop at one time. We were calling them tranches, and they kind of rolled in over several months or several years. Is that complete? So in total, are we expecting any more resources? And kind of just again following up on what the mayor was asking, we did get some additional emergency rental dollars. But do we think that is all that is coming in now? Like, is this the final amount of dollars that we think that we will consider our COVID relief dollars?
As far as ARPA, yes, we believe this to be our total allotment, $187 million. ERA, the Treasury is always moving monies around, so it's possible we could receive additional reallocated dollars, especially because the city has done such a great job to expend those funds. So I don't want to leave that as a final for ERA, but it's possible.
And so we're very grateful to receive this amount of resources to support our recovery in our city. But could you speak to some of the, not even the challenges, but just what are the reporting requirements that come with these types of dollars, the oversight that comes with this type of dollars, what that meant to us as a city and our big teams, but also what that may have meant or what that does mean to the hundreds of thousands of organizations that we have funded and their reporting as well.
So as far as the reporting requirements, the federal oversight is pretty strict. We have to report quarterly on how our dollars have been expended and how they're obligated to date. As far as monitoring the funds that have gone out to the community so far, we always face challenges with subrecipient monitoring that goes out to these individual organizations. We have taken on a contract with a CPA consulting firm to help with our audit for the city so we don't face any additional challenges there. Can you think of anything? Okay.
Thank you. I'll open it back to my colleagues for questions. Chair, Vice Chair.
Thank you for the detailed report. Just to clarify, I think for folks, this idea of money being obligated by 2024, can you just talk about what obligated means? And if that means that does that mean it's spent by the end of 2024, or is there a certain timeline that the money has to actually be spent? Because I know sometimes we use words as encumbered or already out the door and those kinds of things. So in this case, just so we can clarify obligation.
Absolutely. So obligation of the ARPA dollars is to be set up by December 2024. The expended portion of those dollars will be by December of 2026. When we say obligated, we mean those dollars need to be on contract and set up in encumbrances as far as
Got it.
how
And-
we're planning to spend.
And thank you for that clarification. I just point that out because, we think about the pandemic and the emergency order may be over, but we're still seeing ramifications of that. And so being strategic and smart about how we stretch this unprecedented one-time funding to really, I think, make it equitable for folks and make sure that that recovery is not short, but long-term, and that we're really investing in systemic issues. So thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely.
And just to members of the audience, since we don't have the presentation with us, I think we have additional copies of the presentation with the numbers on the desk behind us. Councilman Faber.
Thank you, Council President Harden. First, I just want to give a round of applause to the Department of Development, Director Stevens and his team. It truly is a testament to the great work that you all have done getting dollars out the door. If we've already got close to 85 million already out the door and to receive a reallocation of close to 68 million, I think that's a testament to being a good steward of dollars and also the existing need that still rests in the city of Columbus. So round of applause to your team. But with that being said, I'm wondering, I did not hear you correctly. Can you just confirm the deadlines for the ERA new allotments and the home ARP allotments?
ERA has to be encumbered, obligated by September 2025.
Okay.
And the deadline to spend those, the Treasury has not released that guidance. We believe it to be December of 2025.
Okay. And the same for
Home ARP, the expenditure of those funds has to be completed by 2030.
2030.
Yes.
And then the guidelines for the new reallocated dollars, are those the same as the same guidelines we had to navigate with the first few rounds of ERA?
Yes, those deadlines have not changed with the reallocation of funds coming in. It will remain the same.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any additional questions from the colleagues? Well, I think Finance did a good job of setting the foundation. These are the dollars that came in. These are the guidelines for how we must spend them and when we will spend them. And so now we have the foundation. So now let's go to the Department of Development. Now to talk a little bit more specifically about how we spent some of these resources. So with that, I'll turn it over to Director Stevens.
Good evening, Mayor Ginther, President Harden, members of council. Thank you for having us here this evening. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about the good work that has been done throughout the city with regards to these federal dollars. I'm going to kind of break up my talking points into three areas. I'm going to talk how the dollars that CARES that went through development, CARES dollars that went through development, the ARPA dollars, and then the emergency rental assistance dollars. Back at the early days of the pandemic, I remember we were, trying to figure out, we knew we had a health crisis, we knew we had a possibly human service crisis and an economic crisis, and what could we do to address that during the early days of the pandemic. So when the CARES dollars came through, 58 million came to the Department of Development to work with our partners both on human services, housing support, and small business. And Councilmember Faber, I appreciate the kind words you said about the department and the money we got out on the emergency rental assistance. It would not have been possible without the support and the teamwork from the mayor's office, the Department of Finance, and City Council, and your team on council. It was an effort of everyone pulling together to make sure that we were meeting our community where they were and understanding their needs. So I just want to recognize that. So the $58 million that went through development for CARES, $44.1 million was used for housing, homelessness, and human services. $10 million specifically went to impact to provide rental and mortgage assistance. We provided over we provided over $1 million to the Community Shelter Board as they set up in real time quarantine shelters and other, shelters dealing with individuals who might have been infected who were living on the land. And then we also made those competitive human service agencies whole. So those agencies that we support through our bed tax revenue, we used some of that CARES dollars because the bed tax revenue dried up at the start of COVID, so we used some of those CARES dollars to make those agencies whole as well. We provided $12.3 million in economic development. The lion's share of that, $8.9 million, is joint funding with the county that went to 986 small businesses that were served in low and moderate income neighborhoods of Columbus and Franklin County. So we started off initially focused on those areas of the city that had, before the pandemic were struggling to recover from the last recession. So we focused on those, and then we expanded it out to the city and the county. And then we also spent $1.6 million of CARES dollars and miscellaneous expenses, things like PPE, COVID messaging, and other technology processing and safety improvements with the purchase of car computers for the Division of Code Enforcement. When the ARPA dollars came through, we appropriated $30.5 million through the Department of Development. $5 million of that was for Elevate, which is our human services grants that supports organizational capacity in 3 focus areas for our human service agencies. 1, really a focus on infant vitality. 2, those organizations focused on reduced unsheltered homelessness, and organizations focused on increasing housing stability for immigrant and refugee households. There were 48 grantees in that, and that's a 3-year funding commitment. We also provided $18.6 million in emergency shelter support. So really, how are we impacting those individuals who are homeless and living on the land? That was money directly to the shelters, so they can continue to serve those residents and also make sure that they could maintain their workforce and provide a safe environment. $11 million went to Community Shelter Board. Continue to support the emergency shelters. Well, to create 5 emergency shelters, we spent $7.3 million. We spent $4.9 million to help with their mental health specialist initiatives. How are we helping those individuals that are homeless meet some of their needs to get them housed? We also did an additional $4.5 million in human services for 9 agencies throughout the community. $1.2 million of ARPA dollars went to continue to support small businesses in Franklin County and Columbus. So with working with the county, we had $8.4 million in joint funding. And most significantly, as we look to address our housing crisis in Columbus and Central Ohio, COVID exacerbated that. And the emergency rental assistance dollars we received were significant. I mentioned earlier the CARES dollars. We sent out the $10 million dealing with our partner in impact. That was really important. We got those dollars on the street immediately. There were individuals in our community who weren't working, who weren't receiving a paycheck, but still had a rent check due. To give you some context on how we were doing rental assistance prior to this, prior to the COVID, our appropriation for rental assistance was $1 million. So we went to CARES, we went to $10 million, and then ERA 1 and ERA 2, we had over $60 million coming in. And this emergency rental utility funding assisted over 11,000 households, helping them remain stably housed and prevented eviction. The city also funded Legal Aid's tenant advocacy program for a total of $1.5 million, where we combined $600,000 in ERA funds with $900,000 of general funds. The program represents tenants with eviction cases and has attorneys stationed outside of eviction court every day, and it has served over 1,800 households between July 1st of 2022 through the end of March of this year. We also funded Community Mediation Services, who received $300,000 of ERA funds to provide mediation services to tenants and landlords facing evictions. CMS has served over 700 households between July 1st of 2022 and the end of 2022. We talked already about the additional $68 million in new and reallocated ERA2 funds. This will allow the city to work with partners to meet immediate needs and build long-term prevention infrastructure for the next 2 years. We really appreciate the work that Impact did in taking the 10 millions and setting up a response for emergency rental assistance. But we also recognize that we needed to expand the entities we worked with. So people who needed that assistance, we needed to give to organizations that people were comfortable of going to. So the cohort of organizations serving individuals who needed rental assistance went from Impact, who did a great job at the start, to over 30-plus nonprofit partners. And we did that to ensure we're reaching our most vulnerable residents in our community. So as we go forward with the $68 million, we're making $25 million available for rent and utility assistance to low-income households. A portion of the funding will be prioritized for an emergency rehousing resource pool in order to provide immediate funding to households that are involuntarily displaced due to property owner negligence. We're also taking lessons learned from ERA1 and some of the distribution of the rental assistance dollars, and we're building upon that with our partners. We want those nonprofit service providers really to focus on dealing with the members of our community who come in and ask them for assistance, intake the application, and serve them. And you'll hear from one of our partners, Tony Wells from the Wells Foundation, who's going to do the back office work to really make sure those checks are cut to the landlords and people stay in their house. And so our human services organizations don't have to staff up to do that, provide that process. They can focus on the residents as well as making sure that the applications are done correctly. The city is also going to use a portion of that $68 million to fund a stable housing network, and which will build on the success of the homelessness prevention network pilot that was conducted by the Community Shelter Board. We're also going to fund human housing resource specialists and several nonprofit providers strategically placed throughout the city. And then we're going to undertake a planning effort to determine an investment strategy for the remaining funds with a focus on innovation for rental assistance, stability, and the possibility of using a portion of ERA funds for the development of affordable rental housing. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on those three pots of money that we were using.
Thank you, Director. And I think this part of your presentation really highlights the reason that we're here today. I mean, these numbers are large, and we can move past them very quickly. But, you know, I think I heard you say that we serve 12,000 families with ERA dollars. That means emergency rental assistance. I mean, if we continue to slow down and just think about what you're saying, we kept 12,000 families in their homes during the pandemic, and families are not usually one person. We're talking about children. We're talking about folks who may have been immunocompromised. And so I think it's easy to extrapolate that we kept thousands and thousands and thousands of folks in their homes during the scariest portion of our history. I just think that, you know, as we continue to drill down, and I'm sure my members, I know Councilmember Favor has something, I mean, we just really don't want to brush past just the emergency rental assistance alone. I think that there's a lot there, but I want to turn to the mayor, see if he has any comments. Well, the other part that I think is amazing, and I was chair of the Small and Minority Business Committee during the height of the pandemic when we worked to get resources out. But if folks can remember, when the pandemic first hit, there was an emergency program that sent money out to businesses called the PPP. We remembered that it sounded really good and it was a lot of money, but after it was sent out, we realized the money didn't actually go to some of the businesses in our community, the smaller businesses that needed them most. If we can remember back to that period of time, one of the programs that I have been most proud of since I've been on council, one of the things that I've seen that has worked the best in just local government serving our folks was the small business grants program that ran when we got the CARES dollars. I think you said we served 896 small businesses, and that is a good number. I mean, that's a lot of folks, but if you drill down deeper into that, who those 896 businesses were, I think that's really where the story is. We talk about an equitable recovery and making sure the dollars go. Could you hit again, I think you had them in your presentation, who and how we were able to, and my real follow-up question is, could you talk more about that? But also, how did we do that? How did we get the resources specifically to the small businesses that we knew needed them most?
Well, I will make one correction. It was 986
See,
companies.
I love those corrections. I love those type of corrections.
And, let's just say 1,000. What we did initially is when we put together the application process, we identified those low and moderate income census tracts within our community and prioritize businesses within those areas for funding. We also put if it was a minority-owned, women-owned, disadvantaged business, it received prioritization in the scoring of the funding. And that was, and then the last piece is, if you were a business that had 1 to 5 employees, we were really focused on you. We were trying to keep that business, the lights on, the 1 to 5 employees working, and making sure, and one of the things we did, we not only gave them money, we invested in business resource and business assistance. So we have, through our small business agenda, we have business resources and individuals who go out and give some coaching. So it's not only giving those businesses the dollars, it was bringing someone alongside them to help them try to weather that storm and come out stronger and more resilient when the time came, we get moved past the pandemic.
Council members. Councilmember Faber. Sorry, Chair.
So, thank you, Council President Hart, for highlighting, the way in which we wrapped our arms around our small businesses. And I would also amplify that there was a lot of iterations to how we were getting dollars out the door. And one thing that has continued on is the comprehensive approach of ensuring that not only, do residents have dollars to pay their rent, but they have legal representation. And we know 9 times out of 10, if someone has legal representation, that they are more than likely not going to be evicted from their home. And then you also brought back to memory the fact that we had a partnership with the community mediation services to try to ensure that those types of situations do not escalate to an actual eviction proceeding. And so through those iterations from 1 million all the way up to 80 million, there have been ways in which the program has evolved in order to respond to the greatest need at the moment. And so thinking about where we're at right now with an additional 68 million, I believe, you mentioned working with Wells to get those dollars out the door. Can you elaborate on that just a bit? One of the exciting pieces for me is when we expanded the program to support our smaller organizations that are constituent specific. And so, definitely want to shout out the great work of organizations like COAAA and the Somali Link that were meeting residents exactly where they are. Is this new iteration going to be as responsive as that one was?
We actually hope it's going to be more responsive. We're still going to use those partners. They are still going to be the face of the program for individuals who need rental assistance. So the 30-plus agencies that have been in the cohort will stay in the cohort. And they'll still get, the funding to support the work they're doing to support our residents. But instead of asking them to then do the work of cutting the checks and a lot of the back office administrative work, that's where the Wells Foundation has stepped up and is willing to do that. And we've put some technology in place so it facilitates and expedites the payment of rent for our residents. So, I remember the early days, we would get calls at times from residents who believed they had rental assistance, and they did, but their check had not been received by their landlord yet. And so it's just those process improvements is what we're doing at the Wells Foundation. We continue to use those organizations that our residents are familiar with and comfortable with and using as the face of the program.
It's really good to hear because, you're absolutely right. We did receive a lot of criticism throughout all of the iterations. But, it's assurance to our smaller nonprofits that are still doing great work in the community that you're still going to have support to continue to support residents, but then also to our other very important partner, our landlords, right, who have always been an important part of ensuring that people can stay in their homes during this crisis. But at the end of the day, they are small business owners, and they have to have assurance that they're going to have payment that is going to be satisfactory as it relates to the landlord-tenant agreement. So that's really good to hear, Director Stevens.
Thank you.
Vice Chair.
I just want to, again, stay on this, the housing piece. And Councilmember Favor, you hit my point exactly, which is our landlords are a big piece of this. And I really want to talk about this reallocation, because I think we just glossed over the fact that we asked for more money. Can you just talk about reallocation, what that means, right? Why it's so important, because it shows that what we're doing is working. So if you could just talk about what that reallocation process means for folks and where we got some of those additional dollars from.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Bankston. Part of the, I would say, the success of our emergency rental assistance work is we were able to get the dollars out the door. Councilmember Favor is correct. I mean, it wasn't perfect. We learned throughout the process, and I think that was really important that we learned and continue to update the different iterations on how we did it. But we got the money out. We got the money out faster than a lot of other communities. Treasury was holding communities across the country and states across the country accountable for getting those dollars out. And if you weren't meeting certain benchmarks, they were coming in and clawing back those dollars. Our partners at the state, I think, were at risk of having those dollars clawed back. And I think whether you're at the state level or the city level, no one wants to send money back to Washington. We want to be able to utilize the dollars for what they're for. So we worked with them, and the state helped identify a pot of money that they could reallocate to us to use for our rental assistance program, as well as they did the same with the county. And then the Treasury, on their own, looked at who was getting dollars out and who wasn't, and reallocated dollars and identified money to come to Columbus because we were getting those dollars out. And I just want to emphasize that was a team effort between development, finance, city council. Without working together, we never would have been able to get out what we've gotten out. And I don't want to undersell the work of the not-for-profit agencies that we brought in to actually get the dollars out, because that's where I think was the secret to our success. I do want to take this opportunity, though, to recognize the fiscal staff and development. During COVID, the same group of people got 6 times the amount of money out the door in a year than it normally does. So like from $50 to $300 million in contract was a Herculean effort, and I'm proud of the work that they did, and you know, and everyone's still, you know, I had black hair before this started, but it's been a great effort working together.
I'm not sure if I remember the black hair, but I will say, no, and again, it's to underscore that Herculean effort in that it's unprecedented, but we were very concerted as a community that we knew there were folks in need and that we were going to get the dollars out. And some of our other municipalities and other partners who did not have the same values as we did sat on that money. And so we want to make sure that we're getting as much resources as possible for our folks because, again, the emergency order may be over, but the impacts are still around. COVID is still around. Folks are still contracting it. Folks may not be dying at alarming rates, but you think about that single mom who's an hourly worker who now has to be in quarantine for 5 days. Her employer is probably not going to hold her job. And what's going to be there for her? Her rent still has to be paid, her utilities still have to be paid so that her kids can have a roof over their heads. Not only that, it provided breathing room for folks to upskill, to change their jobs because their whole entire careers have been upended. So I just want to underscore to folks that this is not over. And in order for us to really recover the Columbus way, we want to make sure that we get every single resource that's available for our residents. So again, thank you to your team and everyone over there for the work that they continue to do and the work that we're going to continue to do. And let them know that we're going to keep getting some more money to get out to folks.
Council members, any questions? Director, the Recovery and Resiliency Report highlighted the need to increase funding to human service organizations in general. Can you talk about the Elevate grant process more in particular and how the city has increased funding opportunities for nonprofits? This will probably be more of a conversation that I will lean into next week when we have all of the social service agencies come in and talk about that specific funding. But as we start to, we're in the at least second half of the game and when it comes to getting these dollars out. And what we have to now start to think about is where do we go when the dollars are expended? How have we built the capacity amongst the organizations? Have we worked with them to make sure that, but for emergency resource rescue dollars, that they can still be viable and still provide a level of service? Can you tell me, or can you tell the council of the role that maybe the Elevate process can help with the capacity building and just the purpose of that, and kind of start to how we are starting to think about what comes after we get these last dollars out?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Prior to the pandemic, we were using a mixture of funding sources to provide about $5 million to human service organizations. They were critical during the last couple of years on making sure we were successful in getting our dollars out to the community. And so they did build capacity. And we saw that, and we also recognized the need to help them continue to build capacity. So we created the Elevated Grant Program that, I talked about the areas of focus, but those organizations that received Elevated grants, those dollars will help them build their capacity so it was less restrictive funding, so they can go and deliver on their programs. We also doubled the amount of human services funding from $5 to $10 million. And I think what that does is it continues to let these organizations build their capacity, serve our residents, but positions us to have that discussion on how do we fund human services over the long term after our federal dollars are gone. We've found ways to come together as a community to support the arts, to support our Convention and Visitor Bureau business. Now it's time to take that effort and focus on how we're going to serve our human services.
That will certainly be supported by this council. That's a big conversation, but again, not that I'm concerned, but we do have to be really intentional over these next few years, as we rightfully so increased funding to organizations. There's going to be a year where those dollars are not coming, and how do we hold the hand and create a more sustainable funding structure that can allow them to continue in that year when these dollars are gone? It's a very big and important conversation for the human service community. Chair, or council member.
And I would also add to that, the way in which we need to be cognizant of how we're planning ahead to support those organizations. I'm also thinking about renters, because the emergency rental assistance dollars, no matter how many other reallocations we get, those are going to end eventually as well. And so, Councilmember Bankston is helping to lead an effort that we announced a month or so ago around our housing plan that is going to speak to a registry of sorts that helps to build out that revenue stream. I'm not sure, Councilmember Banks, if you want to lean into that just a little bit, but we are thinking proactively because we know these dollars are not going to always be around.
No, thank you for highlighting that, Councilmember Favor and Council President. I think it's the pandemic has showed us that we have to be ready and resilient for when something like this happens. But more importantly, I think it highlighted and showed both the tenacity of our human service sector, but also the vulnerability of it. And I see Ms. Patel, who's here with our Human Service Chamber as well, and she knows all too well. These conversations happen all the time. And so thinking about that rental registry as not a way to simply raise revenue for the city, but for it to be go back directly to our landlords, our small business owners, but also our renters who will need this. We know that the need is going to continue to be there. Also, we are a growing city, and we know with that becomes more growing pain points. And so we have to figure out how we make this sector in particular solvent and sustainable, because our human service sector is not an amenity to having a big city, right? It is the safety net of our local, of us here locally. And so making sure that they are strong will, in fact, make sure that we have a strong community and a strong economy.
Thank you. So we'll go to our last speaker from the administration. We have Director Orth, who is Director of the Department of Technology. Director, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Good evening, President Hardin and members of council. It's a pleasure to be before you this evening to discuss the Department of Technology's use of federal stimulus funds, including both CARES Act and ARPA dollars. These resources have been instrumental in helping the city and residents move forward during the pandemic and beyond. We want to thank you for your ongoing support. We do have a slide that I'll be referencing this evening with some details on it also. With the mayor and city council's support, technology received overall funding of $14,549,868 to support two important work streams. The first was city-focused work to enable remote telework for city staff during the pandemic. The second was focused on our community and neighbors in need of assistance to learn and work remotely during COVID. Overall funding was split between these two work streams, with $4,684,019 allocated to city remote telework and $9,865,849 focused on digital equity. I'm going to first talk about the city work, and then I'll talk about the work in digital equity. Thinking back to COVID, I'll never forget March 13th, 2020, and it's not because it was Friday the 13th. My son was born on a Friday the 13th, so that's always been a lucky day for me. You know, we'd all been following COVID about that time, and I got a call from the mayor's office asking me how many remote staff we were currently supporting. My answer was about 150 DOT people that really needed to support technology from home. Their next question was, how quickly can we get to 3,000? After I stopped hyperventilating, my answer was that I didn't really know, but we would do it as fast as we could. We were fortunate that we had some existing technology we could leverage, and we literally started that afternoon. 14 days later, we'd added 1,784 new remote users, and within 7 weeks, we'd extended remote desktop access to another 2,000. Without the creativity and hard work of DOT staff and our partners, our vendor partners, it never would have happened. And while we were successful what we built was built on top of a temporary solution. As the pandemic continued to evolve, we had no idea of how long it would last. We knew that eventually we'd have to make the city's remote capabilities more permanent. We invested in the technology with these dollars in our data centers to make remote access permanent for 3,000 employees, and that's now a permanent capability that we have and is ready when needed. Hopefully there won't be another pandemic, but if there is, we'll be more ready next time. The initial pandemic response was making sure city staff who needed access had remote devices and connectivity to the city so that they could do the important work that they do in supporting our citizens. What we couldn't immediately solve was the ability for remote staff to make or receive City 645 telephone calls remotely. Calls were transferred to cell and home phones, but could not be originated from City 645 telephone numbers. And this made communication with the public more difficult, as they may not recognize a staff member's cell or home telephone number when called. So we knew we'd have to find a solution that allowed remote workers to answer and make telephone calls from just as if they were sitting at their desk. And we implemented a technology that allowed just that and extended remote capability to not just computer access, but also the ability to make and receive city telephone calls from remote locations, regardless of where staff may be. Call centers are an important part of the city's work, none more important at the time than the call center that was set up at Columbus Public Health to interface with the public who were obviously concerned about COVID and who wanted and needed help. Working with our colleagues at CPH, we used stimulus funds to set up a call center, which they didn't have prior to COVID, to provide telephone support to citizens seeking help with COVID. We also expanded remote answering capabilities for the city's other call centers, including 311, public utilities, and public service, so that all those services could be maintained during the lockdown. Remote access to city systems, data, and telephones is important in the workday for individual city staff, but a large urban city often meets with the public, just as we're doing right now. How would the city maintain civic engagement with everyone potentially at home working? City Council, Civilian Police Review Board, Area Commission meetings, Health Commission meetings, Building and Zoning meetings, and much, much more. Thankfully, the city had invested in WebEx, a robust and expandable web teleconferencing platform that we're using today. Prior to March of 2020, the city's average per month was 50 to 70 WebEx meetings. In April of 2020, it was over 4,000. By October, it was over 5,000 meetings in a month. In 2020 alone, the city had 148,641 hours of WebEx meetings, or nearly 72 years of meetings for over 172,000 meeting attendees. To ensure that we had ample capacity, we invested in expanded web teleconferencing capabilities for the city. So as we, as a city, extended our ability to do remote work, some of our neighbors and citizens were challenged in doing the same. When we think externally, long before the pandemic, under-resourced neighborhoods in Columbus did not have adequate access to resources to connect to the internet within their homes. As Mayor Ginther so accurately pointed out at the time, COVID would rip the Band-Aid off many of the inequalities that the city leadership has been working to address, most particularly shelter, food, transportation, and health insecurity. But digital equity has always been lurking in the background, and it wasn't at the top of mind for most of us until COVID made it front page news. Many students without laptops could not learn from home, and even with a laptop, without home internet connectivity, they had no way to connect to their learning materials, teachers, other students, or their classroom. They had to leave their house during a pandemic to connect at a location with public Wi-Fi to learn. The Franklin County Digital Equity Coalition was formed by the city the Columbus Foundation, the Columbus Metropolitan Library, MORPC, Columbus City Schools, the Columbus Partnership, and many others in March of 2020 with the initial focus of getting devices and connectivity in the hands of students. The city provided $7.15 million in funding to the Columbus City Schools, who was able to purchase 20,000 laptops for students and to use their funding to provide hotspots for students so that students could remotely learn through the pandemic and not have to leave their homes. Working with members of the coalition, the city also provided $1.5 million in additional funding for computers and hotspots for students attending other public and charter schools in Columbus and Franklin County. Our partner coalition members provided hotspots and laptops at libraries within the city, and Columbus provided connectivity to the 2 largest community shelters. Beginning in 2021, we added digital skills summer youth programming, what we call Summer Tech, for middle and high school students to attend STEAM-based educational programs in the summers of 2021 and 2022. This included hands-on learning opportunities for over 1,500 students in 3D scanning, printing and modeling, animation, industrial design, architecture, cybersecurity, robotics, computer-aided design, esports, mathematics, and much more. Long before the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP, with stimulus dollars, we began exploring expanding wireless networking, as many cities did, as a gap network to provide connectivity in Columbus's most underserved neighborhoods. Ultimately, later, after ACP was announced, we decided ACP funding for residents was their best near-term solution, and we shifted our focus on exploring fiber options for our residents for the long term, which remains our focus going forward. In December 2021, we issued a fiber to the home RFI, and we plan to issue an RFP this year. With stimulus dollars, we invested in outreach to residents through our community-based partners across the city, especially in our connectivity pilot areas on the south side and the Near East Side. We did surveys and focus groups to help us understand the importance of the digital divide and to determine a community path forward. We worked with community leaders in the Franklin County Digital Equity Coalition to establish a long-term plan for the city and the county. That work, I'm happy to share with you this evening, is communicated in the Franklin County Digital Equity Agenda. I've brought copies with us for all of you here this evening. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify on the use of these stimulus funds by DOT. We're grateful to you, the mayor, President Biden's administration, and Congress for being able to put them to good use. That concludes our testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Director. When you got to the portion about the hundreds of thousands of hours of WebEx meetings, it brought me back to a particular hearing that council held for 7 hours. So we were a part of that. So thank you, and we apologize. Some internet service providers will argue that Columbus doesn't have an internet access problem, but an internet affordability problem, Director. That is to say, there's the infrastructure so folks can access the internet, but some residents don't make enough to pay that monthly bill. How do you think about, how do we think about this, and how do we grapple with that supposed tension as we kind of think about where do we go from here?
President Hardin, members of council, there's certainly many reasons why members of our community don't have access to the internet. In the rural parts of our country and our state, it is really an availability problem. Simply put, there are not enough internet service providers in those portions of our country and our state to provide service. Historically, in urban parts of America, including Columbus, we do have incumbent providers who do provide service, and we're grateful for that service. In many respects, other areas of the country are working to catch up. Our national standards have recently changed. and they are working to provide just the bare minimums. We need to look forward. Well, we need to look at what will be needed for jobs of the future. And as we continue to move to a digital economy where workers can work anywhere, at any time, at any place, never in our history has connectivity to our homes been more important. Historically, connectivity was for recreation and for personal use. Our jobs in the future will depend upon it. And communities that have robust options will have a better chance of providing citizens with connectivity in their homes. What our research has taught us in 3 years of this work is that our residents want choice and options. And I will finish with a large component of their ability to consume it is based on affordability. While the data is sometimes difficult to get your arms around, we believe there's 80,000 households in Franklin County with not residential internet connectivity. Think about that. That's 1 in 10 households. That's not acceptable. Is it due to lack of availability, or is it due to affordability? The Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACD, provides $30 a month for residents, and we're actively working with residents to utilize that program so they can get immediate help. That's about $30 a month. That's what we think for residents and households without connectivity need to pay in order for them to maintain service. The challenge is service costs 2 to 3 times that. So what happens when ACP ends? We're grateful for the program, but we also know that it's a temporary program and it may eventually go away. So we're seeking options to find ways to leverage the city's 25-year investment in fiber with a private partner to create more options that are potentially affordable for citizens who need it the most. I know that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully I addressed
No, I
your
appreciate
question.
that. I think that a lot of the framework of where we go from here will focus, or at least have a lot to do with broadband on the digital side. So thank you. And I didn't get to say an official thank you. I kind of made a joke about the 100,000 hours we spent on WebEx, but for what your team did in those early days of the pandemic, the work of the city for many thousands of our workers would not have been possible. And so just thank you, and please pass that along to your team. Do you have any questions?
Maybe it's a question, maybe it's a comment. But if you can touch on, Director Orthen, you and I talk about this at length. It's not just about access to the internet, it's about the speed as well. And we know that as more things continue to be online, that takes up more bandwidth, that things are going to naturally take more data. So can you just talk about that, why fiber is so critically important when we talk about equity in particular, about the speed of internet for those underserved families in particular?
President Harden, Chair Bankston, before COVID, the national standard was 25 megabits per second down and 3 up. Keep the number in your head. The current national standard, which was just passed about 2 years ago, went to 4 times that on the down speed, which is 100 megabits per second. In the marketplace today, well, you can't even buy 100 megabits per second. The current standard for most households that can afford internet connectivity is 1,000 megabits per second. And this is due in large part to changes in technology, as you've pointed out. As consumers of internet bandwidth, everything has shifted from cable television to video on demand. So if you think of Apple TV, Hulu, Amazon Prime, things like that, we're consuming more and more, and we're doing it over data networks, not television networks. Secondly, more devices. So 10 years ago, one device in a home. Now mom, dad, the kids, we all have phones, we all have iPads, we all have televisions. All those things consume internet. Lastly is the uses. Video teleconferencing in particular during COVID, mom, dad, and the kids are all teleconferencing on Zoom all at the same time. All those things require more and more bandwidth. And frankly, the industry is inventing more and more uses that require more and more bandwidth. Fiber gives us the best chance. The coax technology that is predominant in the industry today is well over 100 years old. There's a standard called DOCSIS. It doesn't really matter what it means. The current version that most implementers use is DOCSIS 3.0. After DOCSIS 3, there's only DOCSIS 4. We don't know what comes after that. Fiber has easily a 100-year or more upside in useful life. So that 100 meg standard today will become 1,000 in another 2 to 5 years, and after that, it'll be 10,000 and so on. So if we really want to solve the digital divide, we have to think long-term.
Thank you for that. And I'm just a proud technology chair and economic development chair with this next statement, but the impetus of this was the COVID-19 pandemic. But when we talk about equity and building back better, we have to think about the future. And so we don't want to get back to the place that we were before the pandemic. We want to lay the groundwork so that we are competitive economically as well, because we know that things are becoming more digital, that we want to stay competitive in the tech space, that we have to make these investments and be a community that not only our residents have the access that they need, but also that job growth, that future economic activity, the ground is laid for that as well. So I just want to set that stage and thank you for your leadership and foresight with this, and also our partners at the county.
Chair Bankston, just a quick comment. We heard last night in council, the council passed an ordinance for freelancers. It's a great example of those freelancers work at home and need connectivity and devices and digital literacy to participate as freelancers in the economy. So thank you for that.
Thank you, directors. Thank you for those presentations. At this time, we're going to get to hear from some of the organizations that receive some of the resources that we talked about. Again, we'll really get into the nuts and bolts of this next week when we hear from a lot more of our social service agencies. But tonight we have a gentleman who used to sit in this seat that I'm holding right now, former Council President Habash, who is now Mr. Matt Habash with Mid-Ohio Food Bank. After Mr. Habash, we'll hear from Mr. Tony Wells of the Wells Foundation, and then small business owners Greg Manager and Walter Uguez. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Habash.
Thank you, President Hardin, Councilman Bankson, Councilmember Brown. I stand before you today, first, twofold. One is to say thank you, and I'll quickly run through how we were able to take advantage of the amazing help we got from the city, from the ARPA funds and the CARES Act funds before that, and then to give you a little bit in terms of where we are today, and I'll do that very quickly because I know time is of the essence. Just to give you a sense of what we've done, we have 680 partners across 20 counties. About half of those are here in Franklin County. We distribute enough food for 170,000 meals every single day. Councilmember Bankson is one of our partners in that space. Last year, we helped put food on the table of more than 3 in 10 residents. Now, those are unique individuals. So you think about the fact that many folks in Franklin County needed help with food. You know, we tremendously are grateful to how the city stepped up to help in a time of crisis with federal dollars during COVID. Here's what we did with the resources the city provided. Early on in Columbus, the city of Columbus provided over $1.9 million in CARES funding to respond to immediate food needs. Now, the collective used $1.875 million of that to purchase 3.6 million pounds of additional food and groceries that were distributed to our hungry neighbors. We also used $50,000 of that to better facilitate some of the outdoor distributions. And I really say thank you to all of our partner agencies. 96% of our partner agencies stayed open because we were able to quickly learn how to safely put food in the trunk of cars, handle food. And I can tell you in other cities, 80 to 85% of their partner agencies closed. So we were very lucky to have our partners. Because we had those dollars that you gave us, we were able to use those dollars to teach people how to safely do this. And you got to think about this in the early days before we had any vaccinations and we were trying to do this. We also stepped up in the fact that realized that same date in March, it scared the heck out of everybody. We lost all of our volunteers overnight. And so we were fortunate to be able to get the National Guard to step in, or we would have been in a world of hurt. We also partnered with the Community Shelter Board, and we heard some of the dollars that were given out to them today, to ensure that our unhoused neighbors could safely access meals when congregate settings were no longer possible. Through the city COVID funds, we were able to get reimbursed for meals services, providing safely outdoors so people experiencing homelessness would not go hungry. Those reimbursements exceeded $350,000 in 2020, and our kitchen team was able to provide nearly 750,000 meals over the life of the program. We're actually continuing that today still on our own, still cooking meals for Mount Carmel's Take It to the Streets program, and we've been doing that with private resources to continue some of those as those needs continue. In 22, the city stepped up again to provide another $1 million in ARPA funds for emergency food purchases, as needs began to spike with the rise of inflation last spring. Facing supply chain challenge issues was our big challenge. Our warehouse was quite empty. In the 39 years I've been doing this, I have never said I was worried about food. Last summer, I was worried about food and whether we would have enough to continue to do what we needed. The city dollars helped us acquire an additional 1.4 million pounds of food to serve our local residents. As many of you know, I'm also a member of the chamber, and you're going to hear from those folks next week. But part of this is we step forward and look at the challenges. It's really clear to understand from all the testimony we've heard tonight and the wonderful work that the department heads behind me, have stepped up with all their teams to do, is to recognize this is all collective at the end of the day. It's all about these issues are interconnected. We talk a lot in a yes and strategy world at our world. Yes, we'll do a great job of feeding you today with hopefully fresh, healthy food. And we need to go upstream and address the root causes of why people are showing up. For years and years, Michelle Heritage, when she was head of the shelter board, used to say I was her canary in the mine. Because when our numbers started climbing, shortly thereafter, we were going to see challenges in housing and ultimately homeless numbers climb. Well, I got bad news. The first 3 months of this year, the demand for food is up 45% over last year. It's up even higher than it was at the height of the pandemic. And you sit here and go, we thought all these private dollars, the wonderful help we were getting from the city, the county, federal government with food, that we would stretch those and help people recover. Unfortunately, all of the federal benefits ended. So you saw the end of the stimulus checks, you saw the end of the child tax credit, and to give you a perspective of what just happened, in February, the end of February, the enhanced SNAP emergency order ended. What does that mean? Franklin County alone, that's $12.5 million of purchasing power lost per month. So you think about $150 million of purchasing power disappearing for people who are already struggling, and they've lost that type of money. We're not an answer for that. We've got to convince the state and Congress that we've got to come up with different strategies to address these long-term food insecurity issues. Because our numbers are at an all-time high. It's just, in March of 23, we saw the single busiest month in our organization's history across our 20 counties. Families walked through the doors of local charity programs over 141,000 times just in 1 month. So the numbers are continuing to grow, and as we deal with all of the challenges we just heard, and whether it's digital divide issues, whether it's housing issues, the issues are real, and the resiliency plan to me sparks some hope in terms of things to do. As you know, we've invested in Mid-Ohio markets with the private dollars that we were able to raise. We've opened 5 so far. We have acquired the Kroger Plaza, and we're excited. We will be back to talk about what that all means. We hope we'll get a federal earmark out of part of that, and we're raising some more private dollars in addition to hopefully county and city support to open a wonderful multi-purpose facility in the Eastland community. I want to partner with the city in terms of the assessment around that area, what's needed, listen to the residents in that area, but we already have strong interest from Primary One Health, from WIC, from some mental health services, housing, impact, et cetera, to say what are the right things to put in that space because it's big. We will have our own Mid-Ohio market in that area, and we're going to put a production kitchen in there to cook fresh, healthy food and place ready-to-eat foods in the market out of that space. So we're grateful to be able to acquire the facility, and we think it'll be a wonderful opportunity. And it was right in the resiliency plan to step up in a way of doing that to give you a sense of success, but on a smaller scale. Norton Road, which is the Mid-Ohio market we have on Norton Road on the far west side, We've opened a little over a year ago. It is the second busiest distribution in our 20, outside of what we do at the food bank in Grove City. Last week set a record, unfortunately, of 610 families coming through in one day. So the demand is up. It's continuing to grow. We're going to struggle to find fresh food. We hopefully the House at the State House level approved $15 million additional dollars statewide. If we can get the Senate to concur with that, then hopefully those dollars will help. That we've got to convince the federal government that there has to be some kind of systemic change process, because this is not over. Unfortunately, now we're seeing inflation and the cost of what that's doing to everybody. And to dispel a myth, people are working. This is not about not going to work. The people are already working. Some have 2 jobs. But they're going to struggle. If you want a $15 an hour job, you better have subsidized childcare, because if you don't have subsidized childcare, it's a non-starter. So it's a lot in this space. So for us, it really is, and I think that's what the Human Services Chamber is trying to bring out, ensuring that how we collectively come together rather than looking at these things in individual silos. So food insecurity, to me, is a symptom of a much larger problem. So thank you for the time today. Thank you for the amazing support. To the directors behind me, thank you guys. That is, I just can't, when you talk about, the tenfold kinds of ways you've had to step up, do things, get it done, sometimes we forget how hard that is. Thank you.
Thank you, President Habash. This is, it's a community story of everyone stepping up and doing their part. I think I'm grateful that you raised the point, though, that the need is not just disappearing. And that's why this longer conversation about where do we go from here, how do we expend the rest of these resources, and how do we build sustainability, but also that it also can't just be on the local level to help us go.
The sheer amount of numbers that you just heard from all those presentations, and there's not enough local resources to step up to do that. We've got to come up with a systemic change process. We were going that way. We'd have left the child tax credit on, some of those things on. We would have been far better off. We saw at the time that was happening. We had an all-time high savings rate. In 2 years, that has dropped to now an all-time high debt rate. People indebted to credit cards. So, we're struggling. Bankrate.com has a wonderful statistic, and I'll close with this. A year ago, in 22, they said 39% of America could not pay a $1,000 emergency bill out of their savings. So this is a different version than the federal version of the $400 emergency bill. Fast forward to 23, 57% of America could not pay a $1,000 emergency bill. That's Bankrate.com's study that they've been doing since 14 every year. If that is believable, you got almost 60% of America living on the edge.
Right.
And you're one incident from, having to incur either more debt that you're not going to be able to pay back at current interest rates, those kind of things. So we got a much bigger challenge, and we've got to look at it that way. We've got to collectively come together as how do we do it as a local community, but we've got to convince the state and the feds that there has to be a different approach to this. So thank you for the time. Thank you for the amazing work you all do, and to the team behind me, thank you.
Thank you, President Habash. The next speaker that we have to come before council, I'm going to actually go back to the speaker list of who signed up, is Shamika Smith, who represents Impact Community Action.
Good evening, and greetings to our City Council President Hardin, to members of the City Council, my friends, to the Columbus community, and each of you who are here present today. I bring you greetings and words from Impact Community Action and our CEO, Bo Chilton. We want to say thank you for the opportunity to continue to serve our neighbors in this great city. We have wonderful partners with the City of Columbus. I'm Shamika Smith, Vice President of Housing Programs. Our mandate at Impact is to fight poverty. It is important to note that Impact has remained open before there was a vaccine, during the time a vaccine was implemented, and even now, serving our neighbors through this pandemic face-to-face in our office. What we have seen throughout this pandemic with our neighbors in this community is that families continue to need assistance with rent and utilities as they attempt to navigate rising costs and maintain stable housing. This is our new normal. Since March of 2020, Impact has assisted over 40,000 neighbors with rent, utility assistance, and distributed in total over $120 million, and that's a combination of county, city, and state. We've developed meaningful partnerships. We've even funded smaller organizations through an earned revenue model as they process applications so that their doors could stay open. And just for context, before there was a pandemic, Impact's budget for rent and utility assistance was $250,000. While everyone has gone back to normal, kids are about to end school and food costs have risen. We just heard that. We did not practice. There is now a new strain of COVID-19. Evictions have continued to rise, and housing opportunities are limited for the people we serve every day. Emergency rent assistance gives our neighbors hope. Emergency rent assistance prevents evictions. Emergency rental assistance gives our neighbors who have had an increase in family expenses help and hope. What we know is that emergency rental assistance in our community is needed. In collaboration with the Human Services Chamber, led by our good friend Michael Corey, and the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio, led by Carly Booz, Impact has intentionally advocated with the state of Ohio for this community specifically to continue the great work of emergency rental assistance. And you heard today, the advocacy efforts work. Our city has seen additional resources reallocated. We've not stopped doing this work. We continue a partnership with legal aid and community mediation and others. Every day in our offices, we see neighbors who need help. We recently had a woman in our office in active labor who felt as though she needed to ensure she would have a place to stay for her and her newborn post-delivery. While she was in active labor, our staff wanted to make certain that she had everything she needed to go into delivery with peace and assurance. She visited us after delivery. She kept the baby at home. She was able to stay in her home, and we've connected her to all that Impact has to offer. There's also a story of a college student who did not know how to navigate the process completely and needed to draw on a village for support. We became that village and that support. This student is one step closer to graduating from The Ohio State University because of rental assistance. Lastly, a conversation with a landlord advocating for a disabled senior tenant allows this neighbor to age in place. All of this has been made possible by emergency rental assistance. Our neighbors deserve housing and deserve to live where they work. And housing is a human right. Thank you for this opportunity. Impact Community Action stands committed, ready to serve this great city and our neighbors.
Thank you so much, Ms. Smith. On behalf of a grateful community, at the height of the pandemic, it was a lot of eyes and a lot of energy and a lot of focus was on Impact as you guys stood up and turned around millions, tens of millions of dollars overnight to keep thousands of people in their homes. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The next speaker to come before council is Mr. Tony Wells from the Wells Foundation.
Good evening. Good to see you again, second night in a row.
Yes, welcome back.
I have the pleasure to talk about one of the programs that were funded through ARPA, and it was the Columbus-Franklin County Small Business Recovery Fund. In June of 2001, Roy McGinnis from the city reached out to me and said, how would you like to be a partner on an innovative program? And his words did not disappoint. I will have to say, as a professional grant maker of over 20 years, this is one of the most collaborative, innovative, data-driven grant-making programs that we've been involved with. And I hope to share a little bit with you tonight some of the results of that program. So during the first 6 months, we spent the time to organize the program, define it, put the guardrails around it, determine the outcomes, determine the objectives. Over the next 12 months, we distributed $8.4 million to 1,295 small businesses here in our community. Some important statistics to remember is 61% of these businesses operate into low to moderate income communities. 70% were minority owned, 70% have 5 or less employees, and 37% were exclusively women. One of the innovative approaches that we took to this program is we applied something called a social on return investment model. The Wells Foundation was involved as an advisor in creating this model with Ohio University over the last 5 years. It focuses on not the measurement of outputs of how many people served, but the outcomes of the true economic and social impact of the activities of a creative program. So the final report will be generated in July of this year, but we have a draft of that report, and for every dollar that we invested into this program, it has generated $2.91 of social and economic return. And I hope to share some of those numbers with you today. The two folks that are going to be following me actually were benefits of this particular program, so I hope that they will make comments on their experience. But during the program, we surveyed the grantees who received funding, and 92% of the respondees said that the grant was a game changer or helped in a big way. We had over a 31% response rate on our surveys of all the folks who received funds through this innovative program. We also independently had Ohio University reach out to the grantees 6 months after they received the funding. Because after they received the grant, we want to know what they did with the money. How was it helpful? Do they need it again? So one of the surveys they did were to businesses with employees. 48% of the respondents used the funds provided by the city and the county to retain employees. 14% used the money to bring back employees that were laid off during the pandemic. 35% were able to increase hours available to their employees, and 7% were able to increase the pay by $2 an hour for their employees. We also surveyed businesses who used the grant as a way of reaching more customers and increasing revenue. 681 of the businesses reported that the grant enabled them to reach more customers, and that within 3 months of receiving the grant, they were able to increase their revenue by $3,000. If you extrapolate that out, 681 organizations increasing the revenue by an additional $3,000 is $2 million in economic benefit to this grant program. We also wanted to identify those businesses who reopened their storefronts due to this grant program. We had 134 separate organizations reopen their storefront, enabling their businesses to increase their revenue by $4,000 per month. And this information comes directly from the grantees themselves. Again, if you take $4,000 a month times 12 months, benefiting 134 organizations, that created a $6.4 million benefit to our community. I think during the pandemic, all of us worry about mental health, ourselves, our employees, the community. One of the questions that we wanted to learn more about was how people were dealing with the stress during the pandemic as business owners. Running a business is hard. Running a small business is even harder. And so 71% of the grantees reported that the grant reduced their anxiety. And one of the comments that was made by the grantee was, "Thank you, this grant really helped my company employees and decreased my stress. I was able to take a breath, come up with a plan and a strategy, and pivoted my business." Of these business owners that felt the grant had reduced their stress and anxiety, they also believe that it also helped 39% of their employees. As most of us know, business owners and employees are the backbone of volunteerism in the community. And so we identified 584 separate businesses who reported that through receiving the grant, they now had the ability to increase their ability to help the community and give back. They also reported that the number of hours that they spend volunteering every quarter is 60 hours, not including their staff. That generated $948,000 in economic benefit through the grant program. So once again, I want to thank the Department of Development for reaching out to the Wells Foundation. This was the first opportunity we've had to work together. We served as the fiscal manager as well as the technology manager. Every new idea that we had related to making this data-driven and to introduce this idea of a social return on investment model was welcomed with open arms. So we've got a great partnership, and we appreciate the opportunity. If you have any questions, I'd love to entertain those.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Just thank you for saying yes when we called you.
Yeah.
What you guys have done over the last couple of years has been really, really impressive. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next speaker to come before council, Mr. Wells spoke about Mr. Greg Manger of Costume Specialist. Welcome.
Yes, good evening, thank you. And I am one of the lucky ones that got the grant, so thank you for allowing me to share my story. My name is Greg Munger, and I'm the owner of Costume Specialists. We're located at 211 North 5th Street, just a few blocks away here. And I'm happy to say we just celebrated our 40th anniversary. So we made it past 38. Our clients include, when I say costume specialists, it's kind of vague or a little bit, so let me drill down into that. Our clients include a lot of local, national, and international companies like the Michelin. So we create the Michelin Man costume for everywhere in the world other than Europe. Dr. Seuss, when you go on a Carnival Cruise Line, all of those characters are made right here in Columbus. Hasbro, the Transformers, a lot of live shows for Disney and Sesame Workshop. Those are made right here in Columbus, Ohio. In addition to that, we make many of the children's book characters like Curious George, Pete the Cat, and Pigeon. Those characters go to schools, libraries, and bookstores for literacy events. I'm sorry, they are not available for birthday parties. So those are owned by the publisher, and we coordinate those to everywhere in the lower 48 for literacy events. And then locally, you'll see our work with like Brutus, Crew Cat, all the characters at the Columbus Zoo, our Beethoven for the Columbus Symphony Orchestra, and many of the characters for Ballymet. And then recently, we had the privilege to make the official White House Easter egg or Easter Bunny costumes that made their debut just a few weeks ago at the White House. So right here in Columbus, we're making some of the best costumes for our city, our state, and our country. We like to think that we make the best costumes in the country, and when time comes, we pivot to serve our community. When the pandemic hit and that March day came, we sat down and we pivoted and converted our shop to start making masks and gowns. Within a week or so, we converted our facility, designed, and started producing masks. One of our first projects was for CODA. CODA could not find masks. We produced, for weeks, we produced masks all day long, and then I would run them over to CODA, and then they would distribute those to the bus drivers and other staff members so they could be protected and keep the buses running. We also provided masks for all the Goodyear stores across the country through a connection here in Columbus. So that's how we've been able to, partner with our community, but we were allowed to do that because we had these options with the funds, especially the payroll protection. When we were making the masks and gowns, I think we could barely cover the cost of the materials. So all of the labor cost, all of that stuff, that was covered by the payroll protection funds. So we were happy to do that. And then along with the funds that Tony talked about, we were one of the 35% that we were able to increase our hours, so to increase our productivity. So that grant was greatly appreciated. Finally, we are hiring, so we get the word out. So if you know anybody, please send them our way. And with that, thank you again for allowing me to share my story as a small business owner. Again, it's a hard job on a good day, but especially through COVID, it was really tough. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer.
Well, first, congratulations on 40 years, and thank you. This is just another reminder when I said it to President Habash, no one entity, no one person got us through this. We did this together as a community, and what you just explained about how you supported by making masks was just one of those amazing examples. Councilmember.
Thank you, Council President. Just a general question, Greg. Approximately how many masks did you produce, and how difficult was it for you to make the transition? It brings back memories to me about how our country has to make adjustments when things weren't going the way we would like for them to during the World War. You stepped up to address this problem that we didn't expect. Approximately, again, how many masks do you think you may have produced?
Tens of thousands. Yeah. And so these, we designed within a, when Governor DeWine announced the shutdowns, I'm sitting in our conference room with our designs team, and, we're used to designing these very, very elaborate costumes and stuff. And so I'm like, how hard can it be, right? It's a mask. And so over the course of 4 or 5 days, we would make a mask, we would make enough for everybody to wear, and then we would come back the next day and we would talk about how it fit, how it worked, everything. So we made iteration after iteration after iteration. We went through about 12 different iterations. At the same time, we're trying to ramp up production. So I think CODA alone was in probably the 800 or 1,000 mask at that first thing. Goodyear was well above that. And we made them with no live entertainment going on for a year or so. We were dead in water. So we were struggling to make something, and we were fortunate enough to stretch the PPP funds, access some of the other grants that were available to us, and really stretch that out. And we felt great to be able to, to help the community. So I don't know exact number, but there was a lot. I think everybody was happy to go back to making costumes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Next speaker is Walter. Is Walter here? Nope. Well, then we have one public speaker who's not part of the folks who came before, but Ms. Paula Penn-Nadvert is here. Someone who has been an advocate for a long time for a small business and has worked with us and in the community. So good to see you.
Yes, thank you. I'm Paula Penn-Nadvert, and I'm here sort of in 2 capacities, well, actually 3. So my family has lived in Columbus since the late 1800s, so I'm really vested in this community. And I started my business in 1986. And fortunately, during the pandemic, because the Department of Energy has been our biggest, most consistent client, that work continued unabated. And so we were really able to maintain a level of equilibrium. And since the work moved from being live to virtual, it provided more time for some of the community commitments that I felt was really important. And that's what I wanted to talk about. So we have a community garden that's 5,000 square feet. It's the Charles Madison Neighborhood Memorial Garden. And we have an on-site farmer's market, and we sell the organic produce for $1 a pound on site because it is in an area that the USDA Economic Research Service identifies as a low-income, low-impact urban food desert, meaning 36% of the households are at or below the poverty line, 13% don't have access to a car. Closest supermarkets are 4.2 miles away. It's Whole Food and Trader Joe's. So we grow food and we sell food on site. We partnered because of Farm Share that the city was really responsible for. We were able to partner with Richland Grow Up for the last 2 years during some of the worst parts of the pandemic, so that we were able to make our farmers market even more robust. We also host an on-site free summer day camp, STEM to STEAM, it's all in the garden, because we partner with the College of Engineering at The Ohio State University. This work that we've done collaboratively, because the garden is sited in the rear of the Church of Christ, the Apostolic Faith, which is a congregation formed over 100 years ago by descendants of formerly enslaved Africans. This project, this collaborative project, had already started, but the pandemic brought into sharp relief the economic disparities. And the work has been so significant that I was asked to present a paper at the International Society for Business, Economics, and Ethics in Spain last year to talk about this project here in Columbus, Ohio. So I'm really excited about this, but I'm also curious to know how there are additional resources available for smaller entities, nonprofits. We have no paid staff. So all the work that we do is purely volunteer. It's partly funded through my real work, and so I appreciate the Department of Energy because they pay on time. But there really is, I think, an opportunity for more people to be involved in the support of beloved community if people knew how to do that, how to access these kinds of funds. And that's something that I'm very, very curious about, what those opportunities look like for nonprofits that don't have paid staff, right? So people are actually, all of this is volunteer work, even with the summer day camp, the food, the work on the robotics, because at the garden we have a farm bot, we have a hydroponic system, it's all solar powered, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. So I would really like to, and I plan to come next week, and hopefully there'll be some more information that's available for entities that are doing this work just for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paulpin-Nadbert. So I think next week will be also informative as we start to think through where we go from here with these COVID resources. But I think also what you explained, it could also be eligible for traditional either support through council, through individual council members, or through the traditional process that development runs for nonprofits. Is there a size that is too small? Do you have to have one employee to be director?
There is not a size that is too small.
So, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely make sure to get your information so that we can just plug you into council members, because I'm sure council members would be interested in hearing more about that work. Well, that brings us to the end of public comment. I want to thank Mayor Ginther and my colleagues, department directors, and members of the public for being here this evening. As I said at the start of the hearing, the federal dollars invested at the start of COVID provided critical relief to nonprofits, small businesses, owners, workers, and renters, and that the city of Columbus and our community would have been in a much worse position if not for this assistance. So we are grateful for how we all stacked hands and how we all did the work of keeping our community moving forward. Again, this was part one of a conversation about how we have spent, how we think about where we go from here with the remaining dollars. And so next week on May 9th at 4 p.m. in council chambers, we'll hold a second finance committee hearing focused on support for human service organizations and those providing youth programming. So we encourage folks to come back. All of this is leading to, is helping us as a city to think about how do we plan thoughtfully for the last allocation of those dollars to make sure that they serve the community, that we look at lessons learned, and that we're having that impact that was outlined in the Recovery and Resiliency Blueprint book. So we thank you all for being here, and that concludes this hearing.